I'm ready when you are. Good evening and welcome to the August 3rd meeting of the West Sacramento Planning Commission. Tonight's agenda is available on the counter along with requests to speak cards. A reminder to everyone that requests to speak cards should be completed and turned into the clerk prior to the completion of any staff presentation. For those speakers wishing to speak on items not on the agenda but within the jurisdiction of this commission, please write the item number on your card. All speakers will be limited to 3 minutes. Please note that the meeting is being recorded and televised, so all speakers, in order to be recognized, must be called on by the chair and come forward to the microphone. Speaking in public may cause some individuals to be uncomfortable, so everyone is asked to be professional and respectful at all times. With that, we will start tonight with the Pledge of Allegiance, and I'll ask Ms. Lepore to lead us. To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We will now move to the general administration function. Item A, presentations by the public on matters not on the agenda but within the jurisdiction of the commission. I have no respect to speak cards, so we'll move to item B, correspondence and staff communication from the Planning Commission Secretary, Mr. Tilley.
Yes, thank you, Vice Chair Sternfels. I think as everyone can see, we have a short commission tonight. We do not have a quorum, so we will not be able to make any decisions on any projects. But since two of the items listed on your agenda were previously noticed, not only in our paper, but also notices mailed to our residents around those projects, we did want to keep them on the agenda in case anyone did come tonight to discuss one of the other projects. Not seeing anyone in the audience here tonight, and assuming nobody comes in the next few minutes, as your secretary, especially as we have lack of a quorum, I'm going to ask that items 2 and 3 be continued to our next meeting, and that once we get to regular agenda, I recommend you take that action at that time, and then we'll come back to number 1. And then also on number 1, I'm going to do a brief introduction before I hand it off to our consultants. That concludes staff communications.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Tilley. We'll go into agenda item C, disclosure of ex parte communications. Planning commissioners should disclose any communications they've had on the agenda items at this time. Mr. Vu?
No.
Ms. Lepore? I have had none either. So we will go ahead and move to the regular agenda, and I'm going to ask the commission that we take items slightly out of order and go ahead and make a motion to continue items 2 and 3 if there's a commissioner who would like to do that.
I move to continue items 2 and 3 to the August 17 meeting.
Second.
All right, we will take a vote. All in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? This vote to continue those items passed unanimously, Mr. Tilley. We will now move on to item number 1 on the agenda, presentation and discussion of the city's zoning modernization project. Mr. Tilley.
Yes, thank you again. As the commission will recall, late last year, the council approved General Plan 2035, and that general plan had numerous implementation measures listed in it, and one of the most significant ones would be to update our zoning ordinance to align with the new general plan, and of course incorporate any additional new concepts that have come along the way. A lot has even changed since general plan was approved back in December. A lot of new laws have come into play that affect what we do here, and we're calling it modernization. That's a deliberate term. Because although our current zoning ordinance has largely served us well over the years, it really has fallen behind the times and what the city has become and how we approach zoning. So we're using that term modernization, really deliberately, because this will be a much broader look at our zoning ordinance than we've really ever done over the years. Historically, almost annually, we brought various piecemeal changes to the Planning Commission. Mostly on a more reactive basis. And so here we have really the first opportunity to look at our zoning code from top to bottom, and in some ways, start from scratch in some levels. So we really want to encourage commissioners and anyone else who is interested in this project to really, think, new, think modern, and even for those of us who have been around for a while and are used to our zoning ordinance, we're not beholden to any particular part, at least at the start. Some parts of it we may retain at the end, some parts maybe not, but we're not starting with the premise that, you know, there are certain sacred cows in there that we're going to retain no matter what. So we have a broad brush here. This is a council management priority item for this year. And so we did an RFP earlier this year, and we've selected our RM design group to assist us with this. Council approved their contract in late June, and so we're now just getting going on this. So at this time, I'm going to hand it off to our consultants with RRM. They'll introduce themselves. Unless you have any other questions for me, we'd like to go through this presentation for you tonight.
Great. Thank you, Commissioners. I'm Martha Miller with RRM Design Group. I'll be the project manager for the project, and Michaela Vornas is with me. She's a planner. She'll be assisting on the project. And then we're also backed by a number of planners, architects, landscape architects, engineers in our office that will also be helping us on the project. Tonight I want to give an introduction to the project, kind of an overview of the approach and process, an introduction to zoning and what it is, what it can and cannot do, and then also to the zoning modernization project as a whole. And then want to leave some time to hear from you as we move forward, the things that you feel important that we should be particularly paying attention to and that you want us to know. So as David introduced, it is a comprehensive update to the zoning ordinance. And at the end of the day, it's really about creating a concise, a user-friendly ordinance that implements the general plan. The city and the community as a whole put a lot of energy and resources into doing that and really made some tough decisions in articulating that vision. And this zoning is a key component in that implementation of that, for that neighborhood preservation and enhancement, the economic development, environmental sustainability, and overall community health. So it's looking at how we can take that vision and translate it into the rules and regulations for new development to help achieve that vision. And we're at the very beginning stages of the project. We just had a project initiation meeting with staff today and took a tour of the city. We're just starting to kind of wrap our heads around what's here. So we're starting with a research, analysis, and assessment, where we're looking at your current code, what your general plan says, what type of development that you have, whether that's either because of or despite of your current regulations, all your other policies and things that you're tasked with implementing, and what your staff deals with kind of on a daily basis. So once we do that, and we'll pull that all together into kind of an issue identification and an evaluation. And that's really where we start to look at the big picture issues and options for moving forward. So that kind of higher level recommendations. And we'll take that to the community, take it to your commission, get some input on that. And then from there, we'll develop a framework for the complete zoning ordinance. And while it's kind of like an annotated outline. And so while the individual sections may change as we draft it, this lays out kind of that overall framework so we kind of know where we're going with that organization. Because again, that's making it user-friendly and well-organized is one of the key components of the project. When we start to draft the regulations, we actually take them in parts. And this is because if we were to come forward with, 500 or so pages of brand new regulations, it's really a lot to take in at once. It's fairly overwhelming. So we take it in discrete kind of related chunks. So we'll start with the district regulations, and then special development standards, and then finally administration and enforcement with the definitions and general provisions. And with each one of these, we'll draft them, work with staff on them, and then release them to get public input, and we'll present them to your commission as well and get input. We get input on each one of those. We make revisions to them and then package them all together into a complete draft. So then it's another opportunity to look at those regulations, but as a whole. So we kind of see how they all work together. And then that goes through a similar process of review and evaluation and revision. And after that, we go through the formal hearings and adoption. So throughout that process, it's really about kind of building on direction, listening, responding. And while we want to get as much input and feedback up front, we're also not shutting the door at any point in that. You know, we're bringing it back to look at it again to make sure everything's really vetted through it. There also is an online zoning ordinance component as part of this project. While your zoning ordinance is available online currently, the user interface is, I would say, less than ideal. So working at that, making that interactive along with the zoning map as well. Public participation and outreach is a key component of the project, and it really is something that happens throughout the process. So there was a lot of outreach for the general plan process, and we build on that. But with the acknowledgement that zoning is really different. So zoning is more technical in nature. We're not rethinking that overall vision for your community. You know, that's been established. And then the question is now, how do you best implement that? So I would say the questions kind of change a little bit, or the nature of what the discussions are. But we use a multifaceted approach where we're really trying to have a lot of different types of opportunities to have these kind of two-way communication where we're presenting and explaining and then getting feedback on it. So the components are, I talked about the review with the public and the Planning Commission. That would be with workshops and study sessions. We're also going to do code user interviews early in the process, and that's where we sit down with people who are familiar with the code from different respects. Either they've gone through the process, they're architects, they're builders, they're business owners, they're residents, decision makers, and that's where we can sit down and get some good kind of candid input from their perspective, you know, what's worked or what hasn't worked with the current code and what we should pay attention to and consider. We have decision-maker check-ins throughout because we want to make sure we're on the right track and there's no kind of surprises at the end. We'll also be meeting with various community groups where there's something that we know or staff knows that somebody might have a particular interest in. You know, maybe there's some group that's really interested in the landscaping standards and drought tolerant. You know, we may take that section separately and sit down with them and get some input and some presentation. We'll also be doing a project website where people can get project information, sign up for updates, and provide comments, you know, from the comfort of their own home. And then we'll also be developing outreach toolkits. And these are materials that are based on, you know, where we are in the process or other workshop materials that staff or others can take to other community events that they're going to already. And that's really great because, you know, rather than always asking people to come to us, to come to a workshop, you know, we're reaching out to them where where they're already gathering or we're already having that interaction. So again, we're trying to, you know, incorporate a lot of different components and making sure we're getting the word out and so that people know when and how to comment. So zoning, if I were to kind of summarize it generally, it's really about being a good neighbor. It's really about minimizing the potential adverse impacts that the use or development on one property would have on another. And then it's also about having that optimal development pattern that is in line with the vision of the community for the future. So it's the two things that we balance. And when zoning started, so zoning really started as a prohibitive. It was a very thou shall not approach. It was born out of, you know, incompatibility between noxious industrial and residential. So that's where zoning really started. And so what a lot of zoning is rooted in is use-based separation or Euclidean zoning. And as we've, over the years, saw some problems with that, or that just separating uses didn't accomplish everything that we wanted to accomplish through zoning, we started introducing new tools, whether that's incentive zonings, where certain requirements are relaxed in exchange for community benefits, performance-based, where you're not telling people exactly how to meet something, you're telling them just what they need to meet. So noise standards are an example in that, or stormwater runoff. You know, you have to meet this threshold. How you do it is kind of up to you. Physical form-based standards, you probably hear a lot more of this, the form-based coding, where we're paying more attention to more than just height and setbacks. And we're really looking at the design of buildings and making that appropriate. And then there's the hybrid zoning. And in my opinion, all comprehensive zoning ordinances are hybrid because it's really a mix of all these tools. And we use the philosophy of really using the right type of regulation to address what we're trying to address or problem we're trying to solve. So again, overall, the purpose is, number one, implementing the general plan, minimizing the adverse effects, supporting the vision and planning policies of a city, and also achieving that economic and fiscal sustainability. We always pay attention to the economic realities in different jurisdictions, because what make sense in one place may not make sense in another. So we pay attention to that. And what zoning can do, a couple of things. It looks at use regulations. So what uses are permitted, what uses have certain standards that apply to them to address often those compatibility concerns, which uses are prohibited, development and design standards, again, making sure that form of the development is consistent with that desired character that you're looking for, performance standards addressing compatibility, and then predictability and that assurance of potential development. And that's important not only to people who are looking to develop, but also to residents and neighbors, that they want to know what could happen on that lot next to them or what might occur. What we cannot do, and sometimes we're asked to through zoning, is we can't dictate architectural design. So we can set that envelope and certain things for physical character, but we cannot dictate the architectural design. We also cannot regulate free market, can't determine that exact mix of tenants. We can identify what types of uses are allowed or not allowed. And then also establish land use policy. This is one thing we're always looking for what we're doing we're looking for that basis in your planning policies. So what is that general plan basis for what we're doing? And we believe in zoning. It's what I do. I find it exciting because I think it is one of the most important tools that we have. It's really where that rubber meets the road. So we think it should perform. It really should implement your city's policies. It should be positive and design friendly, focusing on what the city wants to see, not just on what you don't want to see. Respecting the community character, particularly neighborhoods. People feel, it's a very personal thing, feel very strongly about their neighborhood, making sure we protect that, recognizing that economic reality. Again, what will make sense here won't make sense somewhere else. And then also rethinking our traditional assumptions. As David mentioned, a lot of things has changed since your zoning was last updated. So we're rethinking that in a modern way, not only what can happen, but how that happens, what that process is. So when we do this and when we draft the zoning ordinances, we always pay attention to who will be using the zoning code. And there's a broad range of people that use it, and they'll use it for different purposes. And one thing we talked about with staff today is that, when we're reviewing this and drafting it, we're going to be reading it. But we need to remember that that's not actually how people use it. No one sits down and breaks it open and reads it cover to cover. So it's really important to have things organized so people know where to go within that without having to read, 400 pages or so on. So applicants, they want to know what the rules are, what the time frame is for, making a decision, what that process is, how do neighbors provide input into that. Do they have a say in my project, or is this approved at a staff level? Design professionals also want to know those clear rules, but they might also be interested in where the flexibility is. So maybe they have a particular design solution, can that be considered and what that process is? Planning staff and city officials, you always looking at responding to community concerns. Sometimes there seems to be some conflicting priorities or, multiple priorities you're trying to balance. And then how to protect the city's character, environmental resources. Residents, business owners, what can be built, how long it will take, when can they provide input, when's the final answer coming. And this is kind of a general grouping. Obviously, there's some, overlap in all this, but just as risk of oversimplification. But we're always trying to find the right balance. And again, this is one of the things that we're constantly balancing, those trade-offs of really what makes sense in West Sacramento. And again, as I said with the economic piece, this is going to be different in different communities, and it's really about doing what's right for you. So overall, with the zoning modernization, the objectives are to, create the comprehensive zoning ordinance update that's consistent with and implements your general plan, particularly looking at some of the new ideas in there that your current zoning doesn't address, like the mixed use, promoting the high quality design, having the clear and effective regulations, modernizing the terms, definitions, having that clear permit process. And we're talking about increasing efficiency and predictability, and we'll talk about streamlining. This doesn't always mean, the fastest, way to yes. Sometimes it also means the fastest way to no. Having that clear and predictable path is important. Consistency with state and federal law, and then again, overall, clear, concise, easy to use and understand. So in talking to staff and through the RFP and just putting some initial observations together, there are some kind of key issues overall to look at, and that's, again, the user friendliness, recognizing the differences in character and context throughout the city. So different residential areas have different character, even different industrial areas have different character, and how do those get expressed in the development and design standards? The use regulation, again, reflecting modern uses, not only in the types of uses, overall the definition for, but what kind of use mix is appropriate. Industrial is changing a lot, the face of industrial, and rethinking that, and what does that mean as we look out forward in the future? Retail is another one of those. Mobility and parking regulations. This is really going through, a transformation, right? Our mobility systems, and we need to think about how that really affects parking demand, and how does the city want to react with that, considering all these changes in our transportation systems that are really transformative. Sustainability and the climate action plan, integrating these principles throughout the zoning ordinance, and then again, that online zoning ordinance, so that's improved, and it really is interactive and user-friendly. One of the key things is the analysis of standards, looking at sample projects, looking around the city, seeing if, what happened was because of or despite of a regulation. Is it that a regulation needs to be changed? Are new regulations needed? Do we just need to get rid of some of those? So we're always kind of looking through that, and then how to best address them, whether it's through standards, criteria, or if something's really a guideline. And streamlining the permit process, this is the impression that many people have as they enter a planning department or a city office, and we want to make sure that there's a clear process. Whatever the process it is, everyone understands what it goes through and what the steps are for decision. So that kind of concludes my overview of the project and the introduction to zoning. What we'd like to hear from you is if you have any questions in particular, but also are there things that, when staff said they were doing this, that you particularly wanted to get out of this, what your major objectives are. And then we also have some just questions to kind of help the discussion along.
Very good. Thank you so much for your presentation. I will look to my left to Commissioner Vu if he has any questions or comments.
Yeah, a quick question for either staff or the consultant. You mentioned that earlier today you did a tour of the city. Where exactly did you guys go, and why those particular locations?
Well, I don't know if they'll know all the names of all the districts we went to, but we went nearly everywhere. We were up by the rivers and went all the way down to Jefferson and Southport Parkway, and then pretty much everywhere in between. I really wanted to show them, the variety of landforms that we have in our community, and then drill down from there that we have a lot of different, just variety in residential neighborhoods. And I wanted to point out some of the subtleties that those neighborhoods have that, we experience in staff level, in sort of our day-to-day work, that may not be readily obvious. Not all single family is the same. Sometimes it matters, like the age of the housing stock and everything. We're going to get into a lot of nuts and bolts here that, sometimes a lot of these topics don't always bubble up to the planning commission, like, RV parking and fences and things, but these are very real issues in our neighborhoods. We hear every day, and our code enforcement hear every day. So I really wanted to show our consultant team as much as I could in the city, because we're a very diverse city from a land use standpoint. And that's going to make this project potentially a little more challenging, because I don't think one size fits all anymore.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
No more.
Commissioner Lepore?
I don't have a lot of questions yet, but thank you for the presentation. It's really interesting to see the process and that, it is critical that these are modernized and addressed, and especially the mixed-use component, because it's, I think, important. But to Mr. Tilley's point, it doesn't necessarily maybe fit everywhere within our city. So I don't have a lot of questions right now, but I'm interested to learn more about the process, and so, thank you.
Mhm.
Concurring with my commissioners, thank you for coming and for the presentation, and Mr. Tilley, thank you for putting this on the agenda tonight. Just a couple kind of broad brush comments and feedback from my seat at the table. There's a couple things I'm really hoping we can address through this process. One is solving some of the old zoning problems that have been around for a long time. I mean, we have kind of some really weirdly zoned parcels around certain parts, particularly in the north part of town that was, has been there for much longer than Southport, and we had a little more, and was there before we were even incorporated, that we kind of need to figure out what we're doing with long-term, and need some more consistency up there in what we're okay with and what we're not okay with. Another one would be, I really liked the comment about incentivizing desired outcomes. I'd be really interested in learning more about any other strategies that other cities are adopting to do that. I think we have some really unique and awesome opportunities in West Sac on the development front, but I'm not sure we're incentivizing them through zoning, and I'm not sure even what that looks like. So I'm really excited to hear more about that. I'd also like to see to what extent our zoning ordinance changes can reflect both our economic development strategy and our city's public health goals. On the economic development side, I think our city has a very clear strategy on wanting to become kind of an international food hub, and I'm not sure if all of our zoning works for that right now or doesn't. So I want to be able to encourage that to the greatest extent possible. And then on the public health side, I think it's just an area that, from a zoning and ordinance perspective, we've been very shy about compared to some other communities in both the region and the state. And so I think this may be an opportunity to take a fresh look at what can we do through our zoning and ordinances to promote better public health outcomes in our community, because we have some real significant public health challenges here, especially when compared to the rest of the county. I love the process effectiveness stuff. I wasn't expecting that to be part of this process, but I'm a huge fan of it, so I'm really excited to hear that it's in there.
Well, yeah, I mean, we really want to be able to see if we can break this thing before we put it out there, in prime time. And we're going to use some real projects, and then some other projects that would be very desirable for us to have. If I could pick up a certain, pizza restaurant from Midtown, and could I, if I wanted to put it, in a given place, would the zoning allow that? Things like that. We really want to make sure this thing is going to work in the real world and really accomplish our objectives. And I mean, I fully expect we'll have to do some cleanup, after a year or two, once we've seen it, in action. But we're really going to try to, get, pretty close to the bullseye, from when we lay it out. But I encourage all of you just through your travels through the city to, be thinking about everything that you see around you that zoning, can touch. I mean, that's, where you park your car. It's how big a sign could be on a business, how high a fence might be, how tall a building, could be or should be. All of those things around you, are really in the zoning ordinance. And I recognize a lot of those nuts and bolts stuff, we don't talk about too much at the Planning Commission when we look at our projects. But, the zoning, it really, it gets at a lot of, different aspects of our community that, are important for our residents and businesses in day-to-day life. So as we go through this, if you note something about, some of these things you see, it probably is a tie-in, back to zoning, and, I'd like to hear things that, you think are good, and maybe some things that are not so good, out there. And zoning, we often talk about new projects, here from scratch, but, this will affect a lot, primarily existing, developed properties as well. We'll see, what comes out of it, and, things may change a lot, they may not change very much. But, everything you see out there, there's typically some zoning tie-in to it. So, even if that's, not, readily obvious. So as we go through this, we definitely want to hear more along the way, and, you can be informally. We will agendize this, periodically, as needed. But we really want to hear about those things, and, we really need to get into the weeds here, quite a bit on some of these topics.
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Chili. Just one more piece of feedback for you all, and kind of something I would hope to see would be any suggestions for, or frameworks for dealing with some of the areas of town that we know are going to transition over time. So particularly earlier this year, we took some action on zoning around West Capitol Avenue to start kind of changing the use pattern there for a longer-term goal. And I appreciated what you put in there about zoning being consistent with economic realities. And so any recommendations you have on, recent action we've taken or future action we should take to get us to where we need to go, I'm sure that'll be part of this overarching project. But that's something I'd really be interested in hearing feedback from you all on as well.
Yeah, one of the neighborhoods we hit today was Pioneer Bluff, and that's exactly one of the things we were talking
absolutely.
about over there is, we know it's not gonna, turn into high-rise hotels and things, overnight, but then, we have that theater company that wants to go in over there, and so we want to make sure we can accommodate them within that current context, noting that, no one's gonna be buying up those buildings and bulldozing and building new ones, probably for, not right away at least, so.
Right.
And that will be a topic of conversation going throughout is, the potential of nonconformities, or which nonconformities are created, and, working to not create unintended consequences through that, and recognizing that there is a transition, and there's some areas where you may say, you'll have a different opinion. So there may be some areas that I don't care, that's non-conforming, you can't do anything unless you bring everything up into into conforming status. But then you might have some other things, well, you can do certain improvements, or there's more of a graduated transition that's allowed. So that will be a constant kind of thing that we're thinking about in drafting regulations, particularly in areas where things are changing, and we'll be looking for input on that, as well as where the appropriate tactic is.
Sure, and I think one of the things you'll find is, although we are a smaller city, we're one in which likes to dream big and do big things, and so the flexibility piece, I think, will be important for us, and also trying to keep our options open while recognizing some things may not happen in the timeframe
Sure.
we certainly hoped they would.
Yeah, I think the other piece about this we talked about earlier that I think is really exciting and is, the mobility tie-in and how mobility will be achieved going forward, and then what that may mean for land use patterns and how we need to do things. It's so much different, now. I'm really hoping we are getting away from, parking every single site in isolation, and, really being able to account for the different ways people getting around and the changing retail landscape. I mean, all these things are stuff I want to, get into with this and have some, good discussions, here at the commission level with some of the other stakeholders, and that really goes to sort of why we're really calling this, modernization.
Awesome. Cool. Any other comments from the commissioners? Very well. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you.
Okay, cool.
So we'll move now to the general administration function, part 2, informal discussion. Anything any commissioners would like to share? Or Mr. Tilley?
Nope, no, thank you.
All right, with that, I'll accept a motion to adjourn. Don't all go at once. Great.